Scientific Exploration Society is a British charity dedicated to the exploration and conservation of the planet. It was founded in 1969 by Colonel John Blashford Snell, and since then has engaged in more than 200 expeditions in remote parts of the world. Many thousands of people have participated in these expeditions, not least those of Operations Drake and Raleigh, supported by the then Prince of Wales, which engaged young people from many countries in life-changing exploration, citizen science, and adventure. SES today continues its work to promote exploration and to act as a portal to the world of expeditions involved in climate change, environmental protection and conservation. SES supports and promotes expeditions through funding, mentoring, training, and endorsement. Its membership is a unique community, including many famous explorers, such as Sir Ranulph Fiennes, Dr. Jane Goodall, Rosie Stancer, Penn Hadow, Bear Grylls, Mark Beaumont, Tim Peake, Steve Backshall, Vanessa O'Brien, and Lefferson Wood. All of these dedicated to the challenges and satisfactions of exploration. By listening to this podcast series, you will learn about these people and their lives in exploration. My name is Peter Felix, and I'm chair of the Scientific Exploration Society, or SES for short. We continue our Meet the Explorers podcast series today in conversation with Preet Chandi, Polar Explorer, winner of the SES Explorer of the Year Award in 2023, member of the SES Advisory Board, and recently retired captain and physiotherapist in the Royal Army Medical Corps. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be on.
We've got a lot to talk about. So I think we just start at the beginning and let's go back in time to when you were growing up, what influences and role models you acquired as you grew up, and what made you decide to join the army?
Yeah, so I grew up in Derby, or as we also call Barbados when the sun gets there.
I like that.
And I grew up around my two older brothers, and my mum. It was my granddad that actually raised me, and I don't really remember having role models when I grew up, if I'm honest with you. And the reason I joined the army is because I saw an advert in local Derby city centre, and I didn't really know anything about it, but everybody was smiling on the poster, so I thought that was a good sign. And to be honest, it just opened up a very different world to me. And the first time I ever went camping, I was 19, and that was with the army. So, it's a basher. So I was like, this tent doesn't even have sides to it. So it was something so different to what I'd known or ever done before, and just something very different to anyone in my community really knowing as well. Like when I joined the military, I didn't even tell my family, and there were some people who weren't really happy with me joining. And I think often it's the unknown, and when we're doing something that is different to the expected norm, it's questioned.
I mean, you had already decided on a medical career because you had worked for the National Health Service for a few months before you joined the army. Is that right?
So I actually joined the army when I was 19 as a reservist,
Right.
and I hadn't gotten into university yet. And I was told I wasn't smart enough to get into university. So I was actually very nervous. I didn't have many GCSEs. I was doing an access course because I didn't have any A levels. And I saw this, army reserve unit that I could join the medical section of. And I thought that might help. So I joined, I became a combat medical technician for a few years. I got into university, qualified from university, and then worked in the NHS for a couple of years while still serving in the Army Reserves. And I loved the army so much, I then joined full time.
And how many years did you spend in the army then? And you literally retired very recently.
I did. So in total, it's about 16 years, and almost half of that was reserves before going full time. And I feel like a big part of me grew up in the army. I joined when I was 19. I was taught so many skills through the military, and I had a really good career, and I'm really grateful to have had that time with them. And I think there'll always be a part of me that belongs to the military.
And you ended as a captain. You did very well, and you were not just being a physiotherapist; you were commanding other soldiers too.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of joining the military. So for me, as much as I liked being a physio, I wanted the reason I joined full time is I wanted to do a bit of everything, and you're able to do that. So, one of my roles, used to cover army rugby teams as pitch side support, so medical support as pitch side physiotherapist, etc. I was able to do a lot of different things, which was really amazing, and that's always the appeal to me, to have been in the military, be able to do a bit of physio, be able to, do different roles in the military. And also you moved every 2 years. So every 2 years I got to go to a different job. So if I ever didn't like a job, I knew that it would be longer than 2 years before I get to move.
What stimulated your thoughts about doing some, serious exploration? You'd done some short trips, some interesting things, traveling a bit with the army, but what made you start thinking about Antarctica, for example?
So for me, it was the appeal of wanting to do something different, something I didn't know anything about. So as you mentioned, I'd done a few different things. I did marathon disables. I had done like different events and races, and for me, it was almost like each year I was doing like a slightly, different challenge. Like, what's my challenge this year? And I think I was searching for something. And I still remember the conversation with my boss at the time. I was saying I want to do something, and he said, "What about Antarctica?" And straight
Mm.
away, I said, "Not a chance." This is a place I know nothing about. I had tried being on skis once, I was terrible. And I thought I had just put it out of my mind immediately. But then it obviously stuck in my mind, because, like, 6 months to a year later, I was thinking, what about Antarctica? And the appeal became doing something I don't know anything about. Like, how amazing would that be to go and try? So I started on Google as a modern day explorer and typed in, how do you get to Antarctica? I saw a lot of cruises and eventually found this logistics company. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I knew nothing. I genuinely did not know anything. People would ask, were you inspired by Shackleton, Amundsen, and Scott? I didn't know who they were. But I would say yes, yes, I was, because I felt like I had to have been for people to take me seriously. And of course, I've learned so much more now, but it just wasn't, I hadn't read about them. I hadn't learned about them when I was younger. It wasn't a dream of mine to go to the South Pole.
Right.
It's not like, it just wasn't in reach. It's not something I knew about. But that was the appeal, that you can come from any background and
Mm.
learn and go and do something quite incredible.
But you'd built some confidence up in that, you knew a lot about the physique. You're a physiotherapist,
Yes.
and you'd run arduous things like the Marathon des Sables, which is amazing from what I've heard. I mean, how many days, or how many hours does it take? And where do you run it?
Yeah, so that was in Morocco, in the Sahara Desert, that event, and it was 156 miles over about 6 days. And it's funny how the context of things change. So at the time, you're like, it's a difficult event. You carry all of your kit. And then you go and do something, subjectively that was harder for me, Antarctica, and it becomes different. I look back at it now and I think, okay, we didn't have to carry our tents. The tents, were there at the next checkpoint. There were
Right.
checkpoints along the way, and it's funny how things change. But sometimes I forget how hard things were at the time that I did them, because I've done something mentally. My mind, when I'm struggling, it goes back to the hardest thing I've ever done, and that's a great thing about going out of your comfort zone and that growing. And I'm not saying these expeditions in Antarctica are in my comfort zone because I don't think they are, but like the growth that there's been is incredible.
So Antarctica is really where you became a serious explorer. Is that correct?
Yes, funny, and like people ask me what I did before that, and I'd done events like Marathon des Sables, but I hadn't really done expeditions, and I think I came in at a side. So the trips I did were all in preparation to go to
Mm.
Antarctica. So yes.
Your first was your unsupported 700-mile expedition. It gave you a record, didn't it, as a solo expeditionist?
It did. So my first trip, I became the first woman of color to do a solo expedition on the continent. And what's funny is I never actually meant to do that trip. So I started looking into Antarctica and I decided that I wanted to cross the landmass, and do this huge trip. And I did a load of my training. I applied to the logistics company and they actually said no. They said that, I couldn't do that trip. And the reason was I didn't have enough experience. And I
Right.
remember sitting there, and it was an email. I remember looking at that email thinking, what can I do now? They told me I don't have the experience. So that's why trip I did I called it phase one. And I think it just goes to show that, if you've ever failed at anything or rejection, it's not always the end of the story. I saw it as a stepping stone instead.
Yes, I think that's true in many people's careers, actually, isn't it? And it gives you hope that if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Exactly.
That's something that's very common, actually, in
Yeah.
many careers. But I think to persevere with something as challenging as the Antarctic, that's something else. So tell us a bit about how you prepared for that. This was a solo, unsupported. When you say unsupported, what does that mean? And give us an idea of what the reality is of an unsupported expedition.
Of course. So, solo. So once I'm dropped off by this twin otter plane, I'm then on my own. And unsupported basically means that I'm carrying all of my kit and equipment with me. So that is everything in there. It's my tent. It's all of
On a
my
sledge, right?
on a sled, yes, on a sled behind me, and I'm dragging it across this landscape, and it has everything in it, all of my food for the duration, my tent, any repair kit that I need, my fuel to be able to cook my food, my shovel, anything that I think that I will need in that period. And of course, let's say I think my first trip I thought would take, over 40 days. I actually had 48 days of food, and it was a 40-day expedition. But I think it's always good to have spare just in case, because what you don't want is to run out of food. Now, you could probably, you can ration your food a little bit. What you can't do is ration your fuel. So I need the fuel to be able to boil snow and get my water. So I need that for hydration and my food. So it's really important to try and manage all of those things correctly. That the planning and the preparation in these expeditions is huge. And I think when I did some of these arranged events before, I could get away with turning up and I'll do the event, or not as much preparation, but I would never do that with something like this.
So for the layperson, you were not being dropped food or fuel en route by a small plane. You were on your own.
I was indeed, yeah. So I carried everything with me. So I have generally I'd keep my fuel at the back of the sled in containers, and then the way I packed my food was in 10-day packs, and I'd empty everything out of its original packaging, and that was because of weight. So on my heaviest sled was 120 kilograms on a slightly bigger trip, and you just want to reduce weight wherever you can. So I was cutting labels out of my clothing, emptying like those Snickers bars. Nothing was in its original packaging at all, and everything was cut down into smaller pieces. So, if it froze, I then wouldn't break any of my teeth. And everything I could possibly need is in there. And that includes things that I might not need, but I may. So things in my repair kit, things in my medical kit. Hopefully there is stuff that I will not need to use on the trip, but it's there just in case.
I want to ask you about, some of the more difficult moments, but just again, so people can understand, if you got into serious trouble, I assume you had some form of communication with the outside world. Would you be rescued?
Yes. So I carried a satellite phone with me, and I worked with Antarctic logistics and expeditions. So they are, as they say on the tin, the logistics, but also my safety. So there was never really a point on the trip where I thought there's absolutely no chance nobody can get to me. Like they would be able to get to me in it, but it might be 1 to 3 days, that they
Right.
can get to me depending on weather. But all that means is, let's say I broke my leg, do I have things in my sled that I could do to, keep myself safe, secure my leg, put my tent up, and then make sure that I've got medications, to keep me comfortable while I can
Right.
in that duration. And I think that's the important part. So
Right.
and if there's any other trouble, can I get myself out of the trouble before having to call them? But yes, I definitely had search and rescue.
Well, I think that gives us all reassurance, and it must have given you reassurance too. Tell us a bit about the worst moments on this particular trip.
So funny. So the first trip, I would say, the worst moment. So I actually started hallucinating towards the end of the trip, and it was completely self-inflicted. It was lack of sleep, and I think I was exhausted. And I actually started seeing things. So I first started seeing people come out of the ground, and I genuinely thought that nobody told me this happens in 89 degrees south, and I thought people were coming out of the sun, and it was something to do with the halo effect of the sun. And then I had this little dog with me and this old lady, day. And I said to them, I then thought I was in a dream that I just couldn't wake up from. Anyway, it turns out I was hallucinating. And over like one day, I traveled less than 5 nautical miles, so not very far at all. And I think I was confused. I ended up going back on myself. Eventually, I put the tent up and I called the logistics company, and I went to sleep and then continued on to the last day. And I'm lucky there, really. Like it could have been much more dangerous. And that was looking back on that. But my worst moments were on my second trip. And the last 14 days of my second trip, so this is 70 days, I'm trying to cross the landmass in Antarctica, I ran out of pain relief. I was in a lot of pain. One injury was my neck pain, which I got a couple of days into the trip. The other injury was an injury called polar thigh, which is a cold injury that I had to my calf.
We've heard
And
about this before, actually, from another explorer.
yes, yeah. And I had one tablet of codeine left for the last 14 days. My neck was so painful that I was physically having to use my ski poles to lift my head up
Gosh.
every like 20 minutes. And my calf was very painful as well. And at this point, I was skiing for 24 hours a day. So I've got 24-hour daylight in Antarctica. The reason I was doing this is because I was very far behind time. And I just thought if I can push that time more, maybe I'll make it. I didn't actually make it, but it was just some of the hardest moments I'd ever had. I was counting to 100 and I was falling down like 14 times every 2 hours. And I just was exhausted and I was moving almost in slow motion. And there's never really been a point before in my life where I thought, I don't know if I can keep going. And I definitely had that in those last 14 days.
Preet, on that particular trip, you say you didn't make it. Did you have to, just haul up the flag and call in your support team, or what happened?
So I'm talking to I'm doing my check-ins at base camp every day so they could see the pace I was going at. And I was told that I'm not going to make it. So
I
about
see.
a week before I finished, they basically gave me a spot, which is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It's over 100 miles away from where I was trying to get to. And
Right.
they said, this is where we will come and get you from. And that made the last week really hard because I was going into nothing. Like I'm just moving forward to a point that is far away from my actual finish point. And
I
mentally
see.
that was pretty challenging. And people have asked me, could I have kept going if I had more time? I'll be honest, I wasn't in a great state. I was in a lot of pain physically and
Mm.
mentally. So I actually don't know if I could have kept going. I'd run out of food as well. So I'm sure it was the right decision. And also this is why you work with other people, because at that point I'm not the best person to make that decision.
And so a plane landed on a particular spot that they had designated and then picked you up.
Yes, I know there was a lot of sastrugi around there, a lot of those wind-shaped ridges, because they told me that it took them a while to find a landing spot. So they found a landing spot and then told me that this is where they were. And I still remember seeing this little dot in the distance, and it still took me 12 hours to get there. And I was hoping it was the plane, and it kept
Oh,
disappearing as I'm going, the big sastrugi, and it started to get bigger and bigger. And I was like, please, tell me it's not that far away. Then I started to think I'm seeing things. And I remember it took me 12 hours to get there. And even when it was so close, I took my GPS out because it was taking me so long. And my GPS
yes.
said zero point 0.2 nautical miles away. And it was pure relief when I finally made it.
That's quite a story. What kept you going? You really were facing, very severe physical and challenging mental state. Were you nevertheless able to be objective and find a way to motivate yourself?
I often think about my why. I didn't dream about going to the South Pole as a kid. I knew nothing about it. It wasn't,
Mm.
in my dreams at all. So why was I here in the first place? And for me, the why is it's so much bigger than me. I'm a Punjabi woman from Derby. I knew nothing about this adventure community or world at all. And for me to go and do something like this, it means so much more than just me doing it as a person. And I
Mm.
feel like it really does take a village to help you to get to these places.
Mm.
And that helped me. It helped, me take one step forward at a time. And for me, it's bigger than adventure. It's if I can go and do something like this, that people can go and do anything. And it's not that I'm definitely not the best at these things or anything like that. It's persistence, it's resilience, and it's doing stuff even when I'm scared. And I'm often scared. I'm often in positions where I don't feel comfortable because I'm doing something that is different or it's new or I'm not very good at. So I need to learn. And they're hard positions to be in. But
Mm.
I think it's so powerful to try and find that little bit of comfort within that uncomfortable space, because I think that's where growth is.
What I find amazing, because I know that you then did another one, you did another expedition, but you did it the same year at the end of 2023, having gone through
Yes.
that experience of your second trip, which was pretty ghastly at moments. And yet off you go again in November 23 on another unsupported 700-mile expedition to the South Pole. On this occasion, you achieved a female speed record. So you've got to tell us about that.
So I like, the female speed record, I guess it's kind of at the back of my mind. Like I knew it was there for the route at the edge of the landmass, Hercules Inlet to the South Pole. And the second trip I did was so hard. Like I genuinely think that trip broke me. I came back, I had to have surgery on my leg. And I had thought if I go for the speed record, it would be the year after. There's no part of me that thought I would do it in the same year. And I don't know when that changed. And I was still exercising because I was rehabbing myself. So I was still, training effectively. And it
Mm.
was, I think in August, I thought, I wonder if I could, I wouldn't, that little thought in my head comes, I wonder if I could try this year. And I didn't know I would get it. I'm not the best skier, and I've definitely gotten better, but I can't compare to a lot of these people who who actually can ski.
Mm.
So what do I need to do to, help or change? Okay, I got some advice about, skiing technique. I changed my skis to lighter skis. I had different boots to lighter boots. I'd have to carry much less gear. And I thought all the other things that I'm good at. My admin is actually pretty good. And when I say admin, I mean everything that's not skiing. So, the way I prep my kit, the way I put the tent down, I could cook quickly, everything else, I could cut
Yeah.
out a lot of time there. And I thought, well, you know what, let's try it. And the beauty of that last trip, the speed record, was I didn't really tell many people. It wasn't anywhere. I got the speed record, and even for 2 days, I didn't tell anyone. And it was just beautiful. It was done very, very differently. And there was just a different kind of piece within that. And to have got it in the same year as me failing the last trip was really nice personally for me as well.
When you say you didn't tell anyone, like the crowd of friends and so on. But of course, you had the logistical support again.
Yes, sorry, the logistical support from Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, and there was a small group of people kind of within the team that knew we going back to Antarctica to do something smaller. That's what I said to them before I left.
And, you did it that year. You were still employed by the army, weren't you?
I was. So that, I loved, as much as I love being in the military, it wasn't always easy to get leave. So I had to apply for unpaid leave for the second trip. And then
Ah,
the last trip, I didn't actually tell them. So I was on my career break from the military. So I didn't tell them that I was going to
oh, I
Antarctica.
see. So you were able to squeeze it in. And what a great triumph that this time it worked and you really enjoyed it and you didn't get polar thigh.
I think
I
we
think
learn from our mistakes as well. So I don't
mm,
think I would have gotten that speed record if it hadn't been for the failure of my last trip. And I don't
oh,
mean failure in a negative way. I think it's great to fail. I've learned so much more from that failure than I have any of my successes.
mm.
The last trip, the speed record, I don't have that much to say about it. It was a smooth trip. The trip that I failed, I learned so much from that trip, and I'm so glad I went.
I mean, tell us a bit about the weather, time of year you did it, give us some idea of what the weather conditions were like.
So it is cold. It is cold and dry and windy. So when you start the trip, you're not starting at a huge amount of altitude. So it's cold, a little bit windy, but as you go up in altitude, it gets much colder. And I always find
Mm.
past like 85 degrees south, you start to feel it. You start to climb at altitude. And some days when there's good visibility are beautiful. So it's when the wind chill hits you, and when the wind chill hits, it can, be, I think probably for me, an estimate, right, cold as -50 with the wind, and that just kind of headwind is, can be quite brutal, and you need to make sure that you are completely covered. So, got my goggles, got my face mask on, and I remember just on my first trip feeling this slight little sting on my cheek. And that was just, a gap between my face mask and my goggles. I covered it up, but I got frostnip really quickly. You need to look after yourself, because in the military, what we call buddy system, I don't have a buddy there to tell me that I've got something uncovered on my face and I need to cover it up.
No.
So the conditions, could be quite brutal out there. And then there was, of course, the Strugi, which are those wind-shaped bridges. And, sometimes they're quite small, sometimes they could be huge, and you often would get stuck in them. My sled would flip over in them, and then I'd have to flip it back over. So trying to move through with skis could often be challenging as well. And it's it's beautiful, it's stunning, but when you're out there and you're struggling on a trip, I don't often think that.
I want to just focus on the reality of the Antarctic, because we're going to talk about the Arctic in a moment. The Antarctic is a continent, a landmass. So are you encountering any water on the trip? Are there any crevasses, obstacles like that?
So on my expeditions, the trips that I've done, I experienced no water at all. So my trips have been on the landmass. There
Right.
are crevasses. Luckily, because the logistics company I'm working with, they have like satellite imagery. So I know roughly where those crevasses are. So I
Right.
know where to be cautious. So I would know, I'm not going to camp in this specific areas because there's probably more crevasses here. So that's quite handy to have. So there
Mm.
are crevasses in Antarctica, and I think it's very important to be aware of that.
There's no nasty wildlife in Antarctica.
No,
Is that right?
and sadly, I've been to Antarctica 4 times now, and I've never seen a penguin
I've never
there.
seen a
So
penguin.
no, in Antarctica. So hopefully one day, one of the first things I learnt about Antarctica was Arctic comes from the Greek word Arctus, which means bear. So Antarctica, anti-bears, no bears. But that's one of the first things
Oh,
I
how
learnt.
interesting. Well, I think everyone's learned from that. So what does your family think about all this?
My family, I think some people think I'm a little bit crazy, but I do know they're proud. I think before my first trip, my first big expedition in Antarctica, it was really hard for a lot of people to understand.
Mm.
It was just so far from, from what anybody understood. Like I remember going to the Sikh temple to get like a good luck prayer, and people thought I was going to Southall, not the South Pole, and they just couldn't understand, that I was going to the South Pole and
Yes.
not to Southall. So, so explaining that to them, and I had an aunt ask me if there are any snakes there, and if it was like Norway, because it's
Yes.
just, it's this unknown land. I didn't know anything about it. So
Right.
there was a lot of that, and I think now they're proud. I do think sometimes they're like, okay, you've done enough now. Especially when I tell them of like my next plans, but I know they're proud of me.
Well, we want to talk about your next plans because those are pretty exciting. Tell us what your next plan expedition is.
Yes, so I'm hoping to go solo and unsupported to the North Pole. Now, getting to the North Pole is incredibly challenging. So if we talk about the differences from Antarctic to the South, South and North Pole, so it's not on land. I'd be traveling on sea ice. And starting from Canada, I would have to get over sections of very rough ice. And it's almost like a maze, block of mazes that's unorganized that I'd have to climb over. And then I'd have to face sections of open water that I will have to swim in my dry suit and get out on the other side. And of course, there are polar bears. Now, making it to the North Pole itself, there's a very thin chance I'll make it there. So why try the journey in the first place? Honestly, that's the beauty in it. It's a beauty in trying something where there's this thin chance of success, because it's not about necessarily making the end. It's about trying something that, is so difficult. I don't know that I will. And showing people that you can try and do something, even if you may fail. And you don't know if you're going to fail if you don't try.
That's absolutely right. Now, we do have a few explorers in the Scientific Exploration Society who have done the North Pole trip. Have you talked to them, or are you planning to talk to them?
Yes, I am. So I have spoken to Pen Haddo, who has been brilliant. Me and Rosie Stancer have spoken a little bit, so we're going to be catching up as well. And I think
Great.
that's the beauty. Oh, and Steve Jones, like there's so many people, to be honest. Like that's the beauty in it. Like same with Antarctica. I knew, and again, it's not an exaggeration. I really knew nothing about it. So how do you
Mm.
learn? And there's only so much online. You need to speak to people, and there's not, a huge group of people that have been to these places. So it's always really, I found the community is amazing in helping. Like there are so many people who have,
At the SES, it's quite helpful, isn't it, to know that these people are there and part of the
yeah, it
same
really
society.
is. It really is handy to know. And, there's just tiny little things that will tell you that I wouldn't have even thought about. And this trip, I mean, this is so much more complicated than Antarctica. I think it's harder in every way. And so it's really, really helpful to speak to them and to use their knowledge. And, I think for me, even getting to that start line is hard. And it's a solo trip, but it's all of those people who've been before helping me and guiding me.
Yes. Now you're no longer with the army. So how are you managing to finance this planned expedition?
It's a good question. Who wants to give me money? So it is challenging. I am looking for sponsors. I'm looking for people to join and be part of this community to help me get to the start line. Literally anything. It's incredibly challenging to get to that start point, and to try and find sponsors is probably one of the most difficult things, if I'm honest with you. So I am open to many, ideas and anything that anybody think could help.
From the actual expedition, how are you spending your time? Are you
Yeah,
giving lectures and so on?
a mixture of everything. So a little bit of guiding this year, some lecturing, working with young people, hopefully getting an adults book out as well, working on that. I'd really could see myself doing some things on TV as well, so trying to find connections into that. So a mixture of a few things, really.
Which is really the way modern exploration has to go, doesn't it? It's a combination of raising money, media exposure, and so on. And again, I think at the SES, we have a number of people who have taken that route and quite successfully. Although it's very challenging, it does mean that you can have a viable career in exploration. And you seem to be pursuing that as your professional activity for the time being. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I definitely, and it's great to connect with different people in the SES to kind of help me open different doors, because again, I feel I'm often going into doors that I don't know that much about, and that's okay. Like I'm not afraid to learn.
So, Preet, when you're not doing all these amazing things, what do you do to relax?
That's a very good question. What do I do to relax? I spend with my family, with my friends. I love being on a sofa in a blanket, watching things. I like reading. There's so many different things I like doing. Like I've always been an extrovert. I've always loved like engaging with people. Funny enough, after having done these expeditions, I find myself actually enjoying those quieter moments more and more as well.
What advice would you give to others if they want to, follow in your footsteps?
First of all, I would say that you can do absolutely anything. Contact me and also start. And when I say start, that can be anything. It could be telling somebody, it could be going on Google and like researching it like I did. That start, like there's no start that is too small. That's what I would say. I think often people are a little bit fearful to start because the what if. What if I fail? What if I, can't make it? And that's okay. Just start. And even if you do not make it, you do not make whatever that end goal is. Trust me, that journey is worth it.
So perhaps joining the Scientific Exploration Society is a good way to rub shoulders with people who might give one inspiration and hope.
Exactly. Come and join us.
Now, I understand you've written a book and you're planning another one. The book you've written, tell us about that.
So my book is called The Explorer's Guide to Going Wild, and it's about trying to get young people on their own adventures. And what I love about this book is these are things that I didn't know when I was younger at all. And I would have loved to have a book like this, about getting outside and how to have my own adventures. So I really hope that, young people enjoy it and enjoy exploring the outdoors. And then on my next book, so I'm excited to be working on an adult's book. I'm just looking for the right publisher right now to get a deal for that. So I'm excited for that to come out and talk a bit more about, my journey and where I started from and how I've managed to get where I am now.
That's wonderful. And how do people get your obtain your book? Is it available on Amazon and so on?
It is indeed. So you could type it in online, Explorer's Guide to Going Wild. It's available on Amazon and Waterstones and so on online.
Terrific. Well, Preet, I'm exhausted. I'm going to have to lie down. Absolutely thrilled to hear about your adventures and wish you all the best for your Arctic expedition. We should all be following that closely. But thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. And in the meantime, thanks so much for participating in this podcast.
Thank you very much. It was great to speak to you today, Peter.
Bye for now.
Bye.